Here we go with the age-old question. Does popularity kill creativity? Yes.
Spanning the globe from the four corners of the world, traveling the earth while entertaining millions in secrecy. These are lessons learned through not so average experiences from a life spent creating reality television. This is accidental education. Reality Lab with your guide, Dr. Tom Cunningham, Esquire, amateur DDS.
Welcome to Accidental Education Reality Lab. I am your host, Tom Cunningham. Actually, I am your adjunct professor, Tom Cunningham. I spent the last 30 years working in reality television, and I have an Associate of Arts degree. So most of my education, or all of my education, has come from my exposure to different locations and people that I have met during my career. So my first question that I posed at the beginning of this show: does popularity kill creativity? And I said yes to it, and I firmly believe that. And the reason why I believe that is because I've lived that. I have lived that very mantra since the beginning of my career in entertainment. I spent most of my career working on shows that were kind of like, they were on the fringe of production. They weren't the most popular shows. They for the most part, were people's sort of guilty pleasures. Like, I started my career as a cameraman on the TV show Cops, and whenever I'd run into people and they'd ask me what I did for a living, I told them that I was a cameraman on Cops, and they'd go, "Oh my gosh, I love that show. My wife hates it, but I really like it." And then sometimes you would meet an occasional female outlier who would talk about the show and how much she liked it. But then the females would always get into how much they liked, like, homicide investigation shows, like Dateline was real popular at that time, or 48 Hours, which was a good crime show that was on CBS. Man, I kind of miss those days. I mean, I think Dateline's still on to a certain degree, but 48 Hours, man, when they had the 48 Hours mysteries, that was some good television there. Anywho, getting back to being on the fringe. And like I said, I've lived this firsthand. I developed early on in my career being a camera operator and a director of photography, and then also having a specific skill set where I could produce while I was out in the field, and I could direct, and I didn't need anyone telling me what to do or what a story was or how to follow a story. It was a skill that I learned, that started with, early on. I would say I'd go back to my childhood and playing with toys, because to me, playing with toys is the first time that, a child is exposed to telling a story, telling a visual story, having a beginning, a middle, and end. You got G.I. Joe who's fighting against Cobra, and you're naturally going to have something that they're fighting over, and so you have a natural story arc, and it just depends on, in the end, who wins. So you have a beginning, a middle, and an end to it. That part of it, of storytelling, came naturally for me. It was just the method that I was telling that story. Instead of having toys, I had a camera and a microphone and usually a sound man with me to tell that story. So the jobs that I got were, especially when reality television first took off with Survivor, everybody wanted a reality show in some form or fashion. And I rode that wave, and it was a fun wave to ride because there were a lot of different genres coming out. And at the time, you had Survivor, you had Cops, and then you had Real World, all very distinct shows in their own right, where you had, Real World was a house reality show. Everything took place inside. You had a video village set up. You had a director. Survivor, you had field producers who were tracking the story of the contestants. You had a video village for when you had the tribal ceremony, or I think it's called the tribal ceremony, or the ceremony where they sent somebody where you were voted off the island. But then you had Cops, which was a totally different beast because there were no producers. I take that back. We did have a producer. He was the person in charge, and that would be Bertram Van Munster. But Bert also filmed, so he was in charge of everybody on the crew, but he also went out every night and told narrative stories. So once that wave started, again, but right before Survivor, you had Real World and you had Cops, were your two main reality shows. And I gravitated toward Cops because one of the main reasons was watching the credits and seeing that there were only 4 camera guys and 4 sound guys on the entire crew. And to me, that represented that I would be responsible for a lot more than just showing up with the camera and being told where to point it and what to do and what time lunch was and everything else that goes with the regular production. So that kind of autonomy really appealed to me, where I was the one in charge. I had the camera and it was like, it's my ball. I can make up the rules and I can do what I want and I can tell the story. I can invent the game that I want. So that part was appealing to me. But making that transition from the Cops TV show into other reality shows was a bit difficult because I had people who now had higher titles than me telling me how to tell a story, which was very foreign to me because I had spent 5 years, honing my craft to be able to tell a narrative story through a camera lens and sound. It was like, I don't need anybody to tell me how to do this, how to compose a shot, how to follow a conversation. It was all natural. And what I've realized now after looking back on my career is that when you do something that's on the fringes and not too many people take notice of it, or if they do, they try and downplay and say, well, that's not really such and such. And in my case, well, that's not really documentary television, it's reality television. And I'm going to settle this right now. There are lots of debates of what the first reality show was and this and that. And everyone goes back to American Family, I think it was, which was a film that was done very cinema verite. But then you get caught up in the argument between Cops and Real World. If we're talking like the late 80s, early 90s, Cops debuted 3 years before Real World did. So the debut of it as a serial sort of, as a weekly show, kind of, for me, is, I would say that was the start of reality television. But then you get into, well, it's not really reality television because there wasn't a cast. There was a cast at the beginning of Cops, followed the same officers in Broward County. But what the producers realized was having a cast, especially like in a law enforcement environment, it's not as productive as you think it would be. Yes, the audience gets used to having, the similar people week after week, and you can identify with them. But in doing a law enforcement show, the actual stars of the show are the people that they come in contact with, who are wearing like the giraffe suit, or who, want their money back because they went to buy crack and they were sold plaster. Those become the stars of that. And in the world of reality television, it's kind of weird because they adopted like talent, stars, this sort of thing, which I get in the whole world of entertainment, but that doesn't really apply too much, or didn't apply too much when it came to Cops. It was a different kind of show that people couldn't really figure out a category for it. So there was a publication, a business publication, or what do I want to call it? I'm having a Joe Biden moment here. It was an industry publication, and it was about production, and it was called Electronic Media, I think was the name of it, and it coined the phrase reality television for the TV show Cops. So when it comes to reality television, if you're the show where a term has been coined after, then you're the ones who invented the genre. I went a long way to get there, but that's my opinion on the first reality show, and I'm going with Cops because the term reality television came from the Cop show. So, getting back to the Fringe. Even at its height of popularity, Cops was still considered a fringy sort of show, and it wasn't until, the popularity of Survivor, which gave birth to all kinds of different reality shows, Big Brother in the house reality category, Amazing Race, competition category, just like Survivor, wasn't really what, the genre of docu-follow. And the reason why it gained a certain amount of popularity. I mean, everybody pretty much has heard the Bad Boys theme before. It's, one of the most iconic themes ever in television. I put it up there with, the clicking stopwatch from 60 Minutes, even though that's not a theme. And I believe that 60 Minutes is the only show that has ever aired on U.S. television that didn't have a theme song associated with it. I'll double check that later, but I'm pretty sure. So to me, part of the allure of Cops was the theme song. A lot of people didn't like the subject matter. They didn't like, the car chases. They didn't like seeing what was going on in the streets of America. And other people did. Other people really enjoyed it because usually people's interactions with the police are usually negative because you get a speeding ticket, you get some kind of traffic violation, it pisses you off, your insurance rates go up, and there really ever isn't, a good interaction with police. And most of the time, most people will go their entire life without ever knowing a cop or without ever being the victim of a crime, where they're depending on somebody to swoop in and help them out, which on the worst day of their life. The percentages of that happening are pretty slim. So that show provided a window into what actually police officers and law enforcement would go through on a day-to-day basis. So by not having a cast or any kind of specific theme to it, it kind of always lived on the margins of television production. And other genres, picked up the fly, like the popularity. Survivor, of course, is well known. Even with Amazing Race, excuse me. When I worked on Amazing Race, I came on season 4, and by all accounts, that was going to be the last season. It's a good run, but it's pretty hard to produce. The ratings just aren't there. There was a myriad of excuses. Mainly the ratings weren't there was the reason why season 4 was going to be its last season. And then all of a sudden it was nominated, like the first year that the Academy came out with a category for reality shows, it was nominated and ended up winning Best Reality Show. So that win propelled it into another season, which propelled it into, multiple seasons per year. I think we do 2 per year. And one year when I was working on it, we did a family edition of it. So we did had this stupid cold for like the last 5 weeks. Anywho, so we did, with the family edition, we did 3 Amazing Races in 1 year, which for everyone who does the pre-production on it, that's a pretty rough go of things. Anyways, Amazing Race still to this day is kind of, to me, sort of on the fringes. I know a lot of people have heard about it. A lot of people love the show. It does have a huge fan base to it, but it still had that sort of fringe element to it because it just wasn't produced like other reality shows where everything is, either in one area and there's a company move to another area. Like when you watch like Survivor, you go to like these really exotic locations and they do a really good job of showing what we call B-roll, which is like the beauty shots of it, and give you, an idea of like, the lizard on the tree branch or the time lapse of the sun coming up and, just really cool shots of the area. And then you get into, typical sort of, camera coverage of what's going on. It's, the action really doesn't move. There's a little bit of movement, but everything seems to play out either like where they set up camp or down on the beach. And then you have your tentpole moments where you have your different challenges and you have tribal council. So it's very formulaic. Apprentice the same way. Apprentice operated on the same formula as Survivor. And that formula became pretty much the standard for all reality shows, where you would have these tentpole moments of the host coming out and saying, okay, you guys are going to do this task, and at the end, one of you is going to go home at the end of it. And that became the formula. And then you get into, and that's the formula that America or the audience could really relate to. They understood it. It's easy to understand. You've got to do X, and if you don't perform, these are the consequences. Whereas in a show like Amazing Race, you still have that, but those tentpole ceremonies are a lot more fluid, and there's a lot more movement that's going on, and there's a lot more interaction between the contestants, and they're just constantly on the go. They're running through airports, through train stations. It's a very dynamic show, and it never really slows down. And to me, that was the beauty of the show and the edit, because the audience got a chance, just like they did on Cops, to sit right next to the police officer and feel like they're in that, car pursuit, or if they feel like the tenseness that, the tension that's building in the car when they're going into some unknown situation, whether it's a domestic or a man armed with a gun. It gives that moment, and then boom, you're in the action, and you're a part of what's going on. And for a lot of audiences like a chance to sit back and see it on play, just as you would, going to a Broadway show and seeing everything and being able to absorb what's going on and not feel like that you're a part of everyday life, where everyday life can seem like there's a lot coming at you and you're constantly inundated with things. Where if you're watching something with the reality show that has these moments that are built into it, you can sit back from it and absorb better what's going on. So when it comes to Fringe becoming popular, and you kind of see, I saw it a little bit with Amazing Race, the popularity of it, more people at the network want to get involved, and that's fine. That's their job as a network executive to add your own fingerprint onto something that's successful. You see that in every occupation. I'm sure the entertainment industry is not different from the finance business when it comes to the higher ups seeing something successful and wanting to be a part of that success, and then also in their way feel like that they're helping propel that success. That's human nature. That's human nature in any business. But what I have found in the entertainment world is, and you can see it also in everyday life. You have a particular breakfast spot that you go to, and there are not too many people there, and everybody. And then all of a sudden, one day it just blows up on social media, and it's totally packed in this place that you could just walk into. Now you got to, put your name in and sit there and wait 15, 20 minutes before you get in. And it just feels like the popularity of something can dilute what made it special. And you see that in music, you see that in all forms of art, that once something becomes popular, it becomes commercialized. And that's great for the artist, the creator, but it does have a tendency to dilute what made it special to begin with. So a lot of times, like your favorite bands, like the first album that they come out with, it's great, you know. And then the second album, there's a little bit more of the music executives putting their own fingerprint on it, and it's kind of like, it's okay, but it just wasn't like the first one that came out. And then that leads, you know, that this happens incrementally. And so, you know, from the time of like the 90s, you know, you saw different changes in culture, and especially in entertainment, you know, going from scripted to reality. Same with, you know, music. You went from, you know, the disco to heavy metal, the heavy metal power ballad to, you know, hip hop or rap thrown in there. And then you went into grunge. And then progressively, everything just becomes more and more commercialized. And once things become commercialized, it's very hard for the fringe to be able to have creations that nobody else has seen and nobody really wants to take a risk on. And that's probably the biggest lesson that I've learned in the entertainment business, is you can have the best ideas in the world and you can act on those ideas. And if the timing's not right, it's just not going to happen. And that all has to do with where the culture is and what's entertaining people and what people are looking for in entertainment. And it's very much this mob mentality of things when it comes to what is popular. And, you know, a lot has to do with financially, you know, who's getting the marketing, what's being pushed, and how much you can make off that investment. And I've talked about this in previous episodes, where what we're seeing now in the world of reality is, if you don't have if you don't have a celebrity attached to this reality show that you're doing, then it's just not going to get greenlit. I need a swig of water. And I'm not saying if it's good or bad, it's just different. It's just, you know, one of the pendulum swings that you see in any sort of business. But what it does, it takes away from your, you know, old docu-follow series where, you know, take like, what was it, Grease Monkey, that garage show, or any sort of West Coast Choppers is a good one. You had a business, you had, you know, the Tuttles who were building custom choppers. And then they, you know, as the popularity of that show rose, so did their sort of star-like branding come into place. So now we're at the point where companies no longer want to take the risk in trying to make somebody who is a craftsman, whether it be, you know, creating a motorcycle or flying a helicopter, and take the time and make them into some sort of a celebrity or a brand. Let's call them a brand. Networks are looking for people who already have brands and who have already proven that they can get eyeballs on whatever it is that they're doing. And again, I totally understand that and accept that, but what that does is it stifles creativity. So people who are creative have to find different outlets for it and still have to figure out a way to create and still be on the fringe, but still make money, or try and make money, just to keep whatever creation they have going. So if you ever come across any independent creators on social media, I would suggest giving them a follow. And I'm saying, And I'm saying this because a lot of it, and you got to be very selective about it. You know, I don't follow Mr. Beast or anybody who gets pushed in front of me because, again, it's just like the entertainment business. They've got eyeballs for some reason, and they're being pushed for some reason. And I kind of steer clear of that. I look more for fringy people who are, when I say fringe, just not mainstream people who are producing content that I'm interested in, and I like their presentation of it, and they feel authentic to me. And I think authenticity is one of the things that you don't get in reality or in, you know, a docudrama when you have somebody who already has a brand, because everything they're doing is within that brand, and you're not really understanding if they're authentic or not, or if they're just being a brand ambassador. And a lot of times when you are a celebrity, you are a brand ambassador if you have your own show, because, you know, you're doing a commercial about yourself. Again, have no problem with it. It is what it is. But to me, it does a tremendous disservice to the smaller creators who don't have the budgets, but who have this constant need to create and to come up with content that hasn't been fully embraced by the machine. And so to me, those are the nice little nuggets to find there in the digital world. And that's what I gravitate toward when I'm looking for something to entertain myself. If, you know, Taylor Sheridan doesn't have a new series that's coming out, or Shane Gillis with Tires. I think Tires is it's one of my favorite, I don't know, I guess you would, sitcom, I guess? I don't know. It's its own separate genre. But getting back to this whole idea of fringe things that you like that aren't as popular, but when they gain momentum, it gives you a feeling of, hey, you know, I was cool before it was cool, now everyone's into it. And that lasts maybe like a month before you start getting frustrated by it, and then it's time for you to move on to something else. And that's just the nature of trends. But it really kind of sucks when it's something that you really, really like and you're really, really into, and then all of a sudden it just changes. The whole coolness of it changes, and it morphs into something different. And again, and I'm not faulting the creators for it. It's just what happens. It's the natural evolution of creativity, that you toil and struggle with bringing something to life, and it, you know, takes on a life of its own. It becomes popular, and then all of a sudden it's out of the creator's hands because the money starts flowing in. And then when the money starts flowing in, other people start putting their hands in there because they want to be a part of something that is cool and something that, you know, that appeals to the mass population. Something that wasn't cool when it happened, but is becoming cool now. And this is one of these moments where I step back and I'm like, where were all of you? And this has to do with Aaron Rodgers' appearance on the Pat McAfee Show. And I know the clips are out there of, you know, Aaron Rodgers talking about Fauci and flipping him a bird, and other people like Stephen A. Myth has come on apologizing to Kyrie Irving and his stance against taking the vaccine. And I think about that because, you know, it happened 6 years ago, but it's still in the front part of my head about everything that everyone went through, like myself, who got COVID, got over it, had it early on, and I still can trace it back to where I got it. And I got it in McAllen, Texas, and I got it in February of 2020, supposedly when it wasn't here. And I can tell you, it was here. I had all the symptoms, not being able to take a deep breath, fever, stiffness in my bones to the point that I thought that I had, that arthritis. I thought that I was going through, very painful arthritis, and I couldn't move my joints, and it was bad. But eventually I got over it, and then everything shut down. And now after Fauci's diary entries that have been made public, it was all a con. And what had happened is so diabolical, because you had, you're 3.5 years into Trump's presidency, and you have half the country that loves him, half the country that hates him. And then you have people in the middle who are kind of like, I don't know about this guy. What does he know about being a president? Really having a hard time to come to terms with, this New York City real estate mogul, kind of a flashy guy, had his own reality show as president of the United States. It was hard for people to make that connection that he was actually qualified for it. And so the lines were drawn, because you had the resist people who, they wanted to impeach him, and we went through the impeachments. You had the people who, no matter if you said anything bad about Trump, you're automatically on one side. If you had something good to say about Trump, you're on another side. And so people in the middle were like, I don't hate the guy, but I don't really like, how he presents himself in front of the camera. I don't like the way he talks. I don't appreciate his bluntness. So then it was just like the perfect storm of things, because you had this little whippersnapper, this little pipsqueak, Fauci, who I was like, all right, well, he comes from the medical world. He's probably not going to have any kind of views that, he's just going to come from a science perspective. He's not going to bring in his own, personal feelings about everything. And man, my suspicions, I wanted to give Fauci the benefit of the doubt when everything happened, but the more and more that the 2 weeks to flatten the curve went on, I was like, all right, this guy is talking a lot of bullshit. He's got an agenda. He's worked for the government for way too long. He's part of the swamp that we keep hearing about that nobody can really point to, but Fauci is definitely a creature of the swamp. That's when I came to the realization of, okay, what Fauci is saying doesn't make sense, and it's not true. The whole masking, the 6 feet apart, all of it. Other than washing your hands with soap and water, everything that was coming out of that little shithead's mouth was total bullshit. And now that we have the diaries, we know it. And it was just coming to that realization that even when it comes to health, things get politicized. Because here you had this guy who represented the system, and then you had the left who actually loves it, just loves the system. That is their religion, is the system of government. And then you have the other side who questions government, but Trump's their guy, and they're going to rally around Trump and do whatever he says. And then you have the people in the middle who are just kind of could go one way or the other. So they're, for the most part, said, maybe Trump is in over his head. I'm going to fall into the Fauci camp. And, this lockdown, it sucks. I'm working from home, or I lost my job. I'm just going to go with it. Trump's writing out checks. Let's see how long this goes. Then it goes months. Then it goes years. And then we come to, last week, Fauci invoking the Fifth Amendment not to incriminate himself, even though he's been pardoned, and the pardon started in 2014, which is odd. And I think we all know that Fauci is in charge of gain-of-function research. Obama didn't want gain-of-function research and told him to stop it. But who does Fauci really answer to? Is Fauci really in charge of public health? Or is he in charge of America's bioweapons program? Both things can be true at the same time. I happen to think that is being in charge of public health was a job title, but also being in charge of America's bioweapons was also a dark title, a black title, one of those titles that isn't written down, but is sort of acknowledged with a wink and a nod. Hey, you know, Obama said not to do this, but, you know, Anthony, we're going to depend on you to find some ways around it because the research you're doing is very, very valuable to us. And that's how you get these labs in Ukraine and in Wuhan, China. And so Aaron Rodgers coming on the Pat McAfee Show felt like a lot of us felt, and the same reaction that a lot of us would have if given the platform of being on ESPN and, you know, and being ridiculed and being mocked and, you know, in my case, not being able to work because I didn't get vaccinated, because I didn't go along to get along. I wasn't one of the resistors. And believe me, in the entertainment world, if you didn't get vaccinated, you were labeled a Trumper. That was, there was no wiggle room there, man. There was no my body, my choice, none of that. It was either you're part of the resistance and you'll work, or you're a MAGA and you're never going to work. And good thing this happened because we don't ever want to work with MAGA people ever again. And in my case, neither of those were true. I had it. And I had taken vaccines in the past for Amazing Race, you know, the yellow fever, the hepatitis, you know, whatever was slated on there. And I remember one time we had a doctor from CBS who was assigned to the show, and he recommended that we get a vaccine for Japanese encephalitis. So I went down to Palm Beach County. I was living in Florida at the time, and I went down to the Palm Beach County nurse there, their public health person, to see if I needed an update on any of my vaccines because I had my stupid yellow card with me. And I had asked about Japanese encephalitis, and she read off the side effects. And one of the sides, she had this big book that she opened up. Let's see, there we go, Japanese encephalitis. Let's see, and read through the side effects, and the very last side effect was possible death. And I was like, you know what? Possible death doesn't seem like something that I'm going to opt into. I'm sure that there are treatments that are available that if I do end up getting Japanese encephalitis, that I will be able to combat that. The risk didn't seem worth the reward. And at the time, the nurse agreed with me. It was this heavy-set black lady, and she closed the book, and she's like, sweetie, I'm with you. Whenever a side effect says death, I ain't putting it in my body. And that was the end of that. And to me, that was the last time that I've ever had a public health official be that honest. And I kept thinking about that woman when I would hear Bricks and the rest of the coven of witches and ghouls that were pushing the vaccine on everybody. And I'm like, something just doesn't seem right. And so to watch Aaron Rodgers have the reaction that he did, there's a little bit of vindication that went with that. It was like, yeah, you know, flip him the bird, call him every name you want, because that's how a majority of us feel. We feel like we've been used, that we were propagandized, you know, to whether it's to see, you know, how you could talk people into something, you know, by different tactics that were employed, you know, by bullying people, by getting neighbors to turn on one another, by ostracization, if I'm saying that right, by shaming, by shunning. I mean, it was a brutal time, and I can't imagine for somebody like, you know, Aaron Rodgers or Kyrie Irving or the tennis player Novak, what it was like for them and the unbelievable amount of pressure that they were feeling. So I give Aaron Rodgers a lot of slack for his reaction to that. And also I'm glad that Aaron Rodgers brought up the fact that the whole premise of the movie, the Dallas Buyers Club, is Fauci. Fauci is the bad guy in that movie. Fauci is the reason why the Matthew McConaughey character was forced to go down to Mexico to buy drugs that we later know as the AIDS cocktail to help people who had HIV or whatever it was that was causing AIDS, because Fauci was pushing AZT, which was killing everybody. Fauci's not a good dude. And we're at the point now where people who thought he was part of the resistance can't come to terms with the fact that they were lied to by him. And they will never admit it in a million years, because their hatred for one man and one man only, and that being Darth Cheeto, has caused them to put every bad thing that Fauci was pushing out of their head. It caused them to earnestly believe that Fauci was right. And it was like, oh, it was just confusion. You know, the data was incomplete. We didn't know what was going on. We knew what was going on from the very beginning of it. Fauci first came out and said, hey, it's no big deal, because like the rat that he knows that he was trying to cover his tracks, because he knew it came from the Wuhan lab, and he knew that they were doing gain of function, which he wasn't supposed to. So he created this whole web of deception. And once the media and the left tapped in to Fauci's arrogance, it was game over. The man absolutely loved that. So he fell into this, trust the science, I am the science. Who are you to say that, who are you to question the science? What are you, a doctor? And even to this day, people who were vaccinated, who did it as a resistance toward Trump and to show that they were somehow morally superior than the unvaccinated, you know, calling them plague rats and everything else, they won't ever admit it. They won't ever admit that they got conned, because they can't, because government is their epicenter. It's what they truly believe in. It's their religion. And they're not going to be an apostate and ever admit that their religion was wrong. They're just the same as, you know, a guy who clacks off of bomb vest believing that he's going to get 72 virgins. It's just there's no communicating with them. There's no common ground. There's no, I can see your side, can you see my side? Because when you're that ardent in your belief system, there's no wiggle room. And that's what we're seeing from, you know, a large segment of our population. And it's not just here in the United States, it's worldwide. Because the religion of science and government, you know, it is taken, well, I wouldn't say taken over, but it definitely has a foothold with a lot of people who have lost faith in just about every other institution that there is. And for some reason, the institution that they keep glomming onto is the institution of government, which is like the worst institution that you could ever want to glom onto. So, you know, like I said, I'm giving Aaron Rodgers a lot of leeway in the way that he reacted. And then you come to the Perez Hilton story, which I suggest nobody watch this video. I did for about 10 seconds, and it was something I've seen a lot in my day. You know, being in combat, you know, as a civilian, working on police shows, going to homicide scenes, and seeing people in different forms of mental distress. But what I watched for those 10 seconds was frightening. It pierced me to my soul, to the point where I just had to click it off and be done with it. And in talking about that video to other people, there's always, oh, I wonder what kind of drugs he was on. Was he drinking? It must have been, you know, some kind of mental episode. And those all seem like viable explanations for it, but what I saw looked more like demonic possession. And I tell you, when I bring up the term demonic possession is what it looked like to me, it's like the COVID thing, man. It's either 6 feet, mask, vax. I don't want to hear anything else. I don't want to hear about, hydroxychloroquine. I don't want to hear about ivermectin. I don't want to hear about monoclonal antibodies. I don't want to hear about sunlight. Don't even fucking waste my time with that bullshit. And I'm starting to believe that mental illness and addiction to either alcohol or drugs are demonic possession. Do I think that there's a chemical imbalance in people's bodies who are addicts or who have mental problems? Yeah, I do. But I also think that the reason why there are chemical imbalances in the brain is at some point the person let the demon come in their body and take a hold of them. And I think for years, we always hear, liquor being referred to as spirits, and you talk about somebody fighting their own demons. That shit comes from somewhere. And it comes from the fact that people don't act how they normally act when they're on those substances. So, you could, very sort of generically say, well, that's what they're just referring to the Bible, or they're referring to folklore that they heard of demonic possession. Very few people want to entertain the idea that demonic possession is real. And I'm really beginning to think that the whole industry of psychology was a curtain that was to be put up between demonic possession and another explanation of what it might be. Just as we saw with bat soup in the Wuhan lab. And I really do think that possession is real. And I think that a lot of people who are struggling with mental issues that they've been diagnosed for and addictions that they have, and the ones who keep relapsing or are dependent on medications to try and ward off whatever imbalance that they have, the one thing that they're not reaching for is God and is the Bible and is a way to ward off those possessions and to ward off making yourself available for those demons to come inside your body and possess you. And I'm saying this, through my own, I wouldn't say struggles, but with my own issues with alcohol in particular. I always thought that the reasons why, things weren't just breaking my way, or sometimes they were breaking my way, but I just wasn't like pushing through in the entertainment world to the point where I thought that I should be going with, with the ideas that I had and the creativity, was due to the fact that, okay, well, maybe, I drank a little bit too much and I blew off a meeting, or I didn't do a follow-up call or an email. And maybe it wasn't the alcohol. Maybe it was something else inside me saying, hey, bring the alcohol in as a vehicle to let something else in, to let something else derail you, to let something else be your guide and take you down a road that you're not supposed to go down and deviate you from the road that you're supposed to be on. And now that I look back on it, it's starting to make sense to me. And it's starting to make sense to me that the whole idea of depression, well, people are going to hate when I say this, but I know depression is real, but I also think that like with COVID, I don't think there's a one size fits all for anybody. And I think if you're really desperate in your addiction, you already know what hasn't been working. What's the harm in trying something that you haven't tried to see if that works? And to me, it all goes back to the Bible. And being a conspiracy theorist at heart, or as I like to refer to myself as a pattern recognitionist, every conspiracy always lands back at the Bible and in the classic battle between good and evil. And the battle is daily. You know, in Alcoholics Anonymous, they say, you know, take one day at a time. And you take one day at a time because there's constantly good and evil forces trying to get a hold of your vessel, of the human body. And you constantly, from the time you wake up in the morning till the time that you go to bed, that battle is real. And you're constantly fending off the bad that's trying to get in there. And whenever I get into slumps where I feel like I'm not creating anything or I don't have any ideas, I feel like at some point I've let something bad in and have to figure out a way to push that out. Because in the end, good creates, bad destroys, evil destroys, and good creates. So if you're somebody who's constantly trying to tear somebody down or destroy things, you've let evil inside you. But if you're somebody who is constantly trying to make not only where they live a little bit better, kind of gussy it up a little bit, or, you know, take pride in your appearance when you go out, that's good. You're creating. And when I say create, you don't have to be somebody who produces a TV show. You don't have to be somebody who has a magnificent piece of art. It could be getting your lawn to the point where it looks really good and green, to planting flowers that are appealing to you, that make your house pop. Everybody has a different way of creating, and it's just finding that outlet for you to be able to let the good flow through you, because good creates, evil destroys. So, Perez Hilton, I hope that he's able to get the help that he needs. He's not been like the nicest guy in the world, but even somebody who hasn't been nice, there's a reason why. And hopefully he gets the help that he needs to get back on the path that he knows that he should be on. And like I said in the beginning of this, if you haven't seen it, trust me, you don't want to see it, because it's very gruesome. It's very, very hard to watch. And especially in this day and age where we got so much grotesqueness in our pocket, walking around with it, it's just not one of those things that is worth seeing in the end. All right, that's all I got for this week. I will catch you next week on another episode of Accidental Education Reality Lab. And if you'd like to follow me, I'm on X at Run the World Tom. I'm on Instagram and at the Tom Cunningham. And also I appear on Balls and Banter on the Drew Berquist YouTube channel, and that is Tuesdays and Thursdays from 3 p.m. to roughly 4:15 or whenever we finish on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We'll see you then. Have a good week.